Do you think that you need to be artistic to be creative? Or maybe you think that you need to make something good. Either way, it can stop you from even trying. In this video, I'll show you the top 8 reasons that people don't do something creative. And also we'll look at the reasons why it's so important to open up that creativity. There is a reason why most eating disorder recovery programs bring in some kind of art therapy. It's a great way of unlocking your subconscious, unlocking your emotions, and also helping you to visualize a different future. The first myth is that only artistic people are creative. And if you've ever heard people talk about creative accounting, then you know that that's just not true. If you think about it, you can be creative in so many ways, and most of them don't involve a pen and paper or paint or anything else. Any kind of crafty stuff can be creative, as can music, as can Fimo or clay, but even anything that you do in your daily life, there are so many ways of being creative. You can create a PowerPoint that taps into that aspect of yourself. You can explain a scientific principle in a way that will really engage people. You can tell a story, whether it's to your children at bedtime or to friends in a pub. All of these things are creative. A big part of creativity is problem solving and also connecting ideas in new ways so that you bring together different bits and make something new with them. To break through this barrier, one of the best things that you could do is to tap. For example, you could tap on, even though I think I need to be creative, maybe I can recognize the ways in which I already am. Tapping is wonderful because it really rewires your brain so that you can change these beliefs that are keeping you stuck. The second myth about creativity is the idea that some people are just born creative. In fact, creativity is a skill, and as with all skills, it develops the more that you practice it, the more that you put it into use. Every time that you do something creative, you are rewiring your brain towards greater creativity, and we all have that within ourselves. As I say, it's a problem-solving aspect of ourselves, and everyone is able to solve problems, whether it's how do I tie my laces or how do I get from here to the place I need to be going. Creativity is innate in all of us, and so you can access it. As I say here, practice is important. So one of my top tips in this regard is to actually set some time aside regularly for this. And as I've spoken about in other videos, you could do this in a Kaizen kind of way, by which I mean just set aside a couple of minutes a day to do something creative. Even that little bit, it builds up over time, it makes a difference. And every time that you do something creative and then sleep on it, you are increasing the way that your brain prioritizes creativity. Another myth that I often hear from people is the idea that children are naturally creative, but as grown-ups, we aren't anymore. And this is a little bit like the myth that children learn and adults can't. Old dogs can't learn new tricks. But evidence around neuroplasticity has completely blown that out of the water. We are always capable of learning new things. It may be a little bit more difficult because you may need to break down beliefs that you have about what you can and can't do, and you may need to break down patterns that you've established of ways of doing things so that you can do things in a new way. Still, change is always possible, no matter your age, and creativity is always there to access in the right circumstances, which is largely about just making a time and a space for it and wanting it. So my top tip in this respect is to do something to uncover those beliefs about why you're not creative or how you're not creative. to find the root of those, and then to use some of these tools, for example, tapping or havening, to shift those beliefs and change them. We draw the idea up into the front of our mind and then do some work around it in one way or another. And when we store it back into our memories again, it's stored in a different way, no longer with all of that baggage attached about, I can't do that, I'm not that kind of person, I'm not creative, whatever those beliefs may be and wherever they may have come from. Another myth that I've often heard is the notion that if you fail, that shows that you're not creative. In fact, quite the opposite is true. So many great thinkers, so many scientists, so many people in general have expressed this idea that we need to fail, we need to accept our failures, and we need to carry on regardless. It's not about all the times that you don't make it, it's about the single time that you do. And each of those failures can instead be taken as feedback. It's about being playful and experimenting, trying things. And it's okay for things not to work out. It's okay for you to mess up. In fact, far more than failure being what stops creativity, I would say perfectionism stops creativity. If you think that you have to get it right all the time, that's completely unrealistic. And so it's unsurprising that you then get blocked and can't move forward. So fail forward, try something, and then try something else. It's all grist to the mill of your creativity. Ways that you can help yourself in this respect are, for example, tapping on being imperfect, on being messy. Even though I'm making a mess, even though I failed at this, I can keep going. I may not have managed it this time, and I'm still going to play around and see what else I can achieve, for example. Another idea that I really like is the notion of making mistakes on purpose. For example, within certain traditions, they actually say that only God is perfect, and therefore you must build in imperfections in anything that you make so as not to challenge that reality. And so you can just do that. For example, Zentangle is a great way of being creative, where the idea is really that you just draw some lines and then put some things in. And if you make a mistake, then you carry on around it. It's always about the creativity, the free flow, the new ideas, the trying things out, rather than being good or perfect. Another myth that can block you from your creativity is the notion that you have to be inspired. You have to receive some inspiration in order to be creative. And in fact, I would say almost quite the opposite is true. If you're just waiting for inspiration, you may wait forever. Instead, it's about opening yourself up to possibility of doing something, maybe even when you don't feel inspired, and then you may discover on the journey that actually there's something there. I remember one of my yoga teachers once saying that he always did his yoga practice in the morning, and that was because he would always get up and roll out his yoga mat. And once you're there on the mat, ready to go, you do something. It's the same with creativity. Like I said, set aside a bit of time, make that commitment, set that intention to do something creative. Get whatever materials it is that you want to use. Maybe you have an idea, maybe you don't. Maybe you sit there with a blank piece of paper and some pens in front of you. This is once again one of the reasons that I love things like Zentangle or drawing a mandala, because there are some very clear guidelines for you there. Get out materials, draw a circle, put something in the circle. It's that simple. You don't need inspiration, you just need to make a start. Another fact that people often forget or ignore when they're thinking about inspiration is that in fact it's sustained creative work that actually brings a project to fruition. It's not just that moment of inspiration, that aha, it's about then putting in the legwork, doing the work that is required. And so one thing that you could also do is to tap on, I'm not feeling inspired right now, and I'm still going to do something. It's a good way to shift your perspective and give yourself a little boost, a little prod in the right direction. In a similar vein, or perhaps the opposite of that in some ways, is the idea that constraints kill creativity, that you have to be free to create. In fact, clear boundaries can help to create a path on which you can do something. For example, the very narrow constrictions or strictures of haiku poetry lead to great creativity. There's very clearly defined ways of how you do it. And so that creates a space, a framework on which to base your creativity. Instead of it being so many possibilities that it's overwhelming, you have a clear line of, I'm going to do this now. So in fact, I think for many people, constraints can boost your creativity. Another way in which this is true is that having constraints, once again, forces you to problem solve. How can I do this despite these constraints? So you bring in different ideas from here and there in order to make it work. And that is part of the definition of creativity. So when you have constraints, you have to bring new ideas together, you have to prioritize, you have to innovate within those limits. And all of those things encourage your problem solving and your creativity. The invitation here then is to experiment within boundaried creativity. Perhaps you'd like to create a haiku, or as I've said, mandalas are another form of this constrained, boundaried creativity that helps to unleash a creative freedom. It creates a space for that creativity, and it also creates definitions and limits for it. And that can be a very positive thing. So wherever you want to bring your creativity to bear, how about putting in some limitations, some boundaries, some notions? It could even just be your intention that sets apart what it is that you're going to do and helps you define that better. Similar to the myth about needing to be an artistic person to be creative, there's also a myth around the idea that logic and creativity don't mix. In fact, there's a beautiful quote from Einstein which says, "Creativity is intelligence, having fun." And I think that this is a great thing to keep in mind. You can use your logic to define, this hasn't worked, I can try that, to give yourself feedback. You can let your mind play with different ideas. This is where we come back again to this idea that there's a problem-solving element to creativity. And there's also a part to it which is about bringing different ideas together in a new way or in a different way. And all of that is very positive. Equally, if you try something creative and it doesn't quite work, it's about assessing, why didn't that work? What else could I try? Bring your logic into it and it will actually increase your creativity rather than the other way around. So the suggestion here for tapping would be something like, I think of myself as logical, and maybe I can apply that logic in creative ways. Perhaps I can apply that logic to my creative pursuits, and maybe it will make me even more creative. The final myth around creativity that we'll look at today is the idea that you need the right mood or environment in order to be creative. This is similar to the idea that you need inspiration, but instead it's also about what's going on around you, as well as inside you, with the question of mood. But mood is different to inspiration. One is more of an idea, an enlivening, and the other is about your state. Now, there is an element to which this is correct. If you're in a grumpy mood, for example, or if you're feeling down, then you're less likely to be creative. However, there are lots of things that we can do to shift our mental state. And there are also things that we can do to affect our environment. For instance, I've already mentioned the boundaries around creativity that you have in the cases of haiku or zentangle or mandalas. And in the same way, you can create an environment about yourself or around yourself that will be more conducive to creativity. For example, I suggested setting aside a particular time, as you do with Kaizen, that you say, I will dedicate this time at this time of day to doing something creative. In the same way, you could do something around your environment. Maybe you change the lighting, light a candle, dim the lights. Maybe you go to a different space. Just even moving your chair can shift how you feel. Maybe you move it around so that instead of looking where you normally look, you look out of the window, or the opposite if you normally look out of the window. Perhaps you create a space for it, like you might clear a space on your desk or set down a messy mat if you're going to be doing something that could get messy, or whatever it might be. So you can affect your physical environment. And part of that is also about a mind shift change. It's about telling yourself, this is the time and the space where I'm going to allow myself to open to creativity. And so you make the environment more conducive for that. Maybe you put on some music, or if you're going to create music, maybe you just get your musical instrument ready. These are all different ways of shifting your environment. Equally, it can be helpful if you shift your mood. And that might be something, for example, that you tap on. If you notice that you're feeling grumpy, right now I'm feeling grumpy, and I can activate my acupressure points, and I can breathe, and perhaps I can shift my mindset. Maybe I can think of things that make me feel more cheerful. Maybe I can think of things that are creative. Maybe I can think about things that make me smile. And the more I smile, the more creative I feel. And I'm ready to do something creative for myself now. Obviously, you may want to tap for more than just that, to make it more something that represents how you're feeling, and maybe something that represents what feels creative to you. So you can think about other people's creative endeavors that you admire, other people who might be role models for you in whichever frame of endeavor, in whichever kind of pursuit that you would like to use for this. Because as I say, anything can be creative. It's nice to do something crafty or in some way communicative, and it also really doesn't matter. Anything can be creative, including, for example, how you put on makeup, or how you cook food, or how you place down and tidy things up in your drawers. Think of the whole KonMari trend that existed for a while. It's all about finding different ways of doing things in a way that respects different kinds of boundaries or does something different from what you used to do. That idea of picking things up and feeling into, does this item feel good to me, or am I ready to let it go? All of these are elements of bringing creativity into the everyday, and also of feeling your feelings more, because that is another of the great strengths of creativity, is that it does give you access to your subconscious mind. It is a different way of communicating. So let's look in a little more detail at what the benefits are of bringing creativity into your life more. I've already said that creativity has a big aspect of problem solving. And if you want to do things differently around food, then that could be a very useful thing to have on your side. It's also a great way of communicating with your subconscious mind. So it's a way of discovering, what am I actually feeling? What is driving my emotional eating? Can I draw what it feels like when I eat? Can I draw how I feel about this food? Can I draw how I feel about myself? Or maybe it's not draw, because that's not your thing, and that would be fine too. Can I create a clay sculpture of it? Can I imagine it in my mind? Can I create some music that represents that? Can I create anything else? Can I knit something or crochet something or do papier-mâché? Whatever it is that you would like to play with and experiment with would be great. And we come back to this thing that creativity is the opposite of perfectionism. And perfectionism very often underlies issues around eating because we want to fulfill a certain body image, to fulfill the expectations and requirements of society or family or friends or a peer group, whatever it might be. And so getting creative and doing things differently can be a really wonderful thing to help challenge some of that perfectionism and to allow different things into our lives. When you bring that part of yourself into the light, you can also more easily visualize a different future, a different way of responding to things, a different way of being. Oftentimes, we may feel very stuck with, well, that's just who I am, that's just how I eat, that's just what I want. And it's through being a little more open to maybe things could be different. Maybe I can think of things in a different way. So you can be creative with new recipes. You can be creative with different ways of eating. You can be playful and experiment with all of these things too. Fundamentally, moving away from perfectionism, being more open to being wrong, getting things wrong sometimes, being messy, being imperfect, maybe being good enough, or maybe just experimenting with things, playing, being okay, are all really helpful when you do want to do something different, something that is kinder and less judgmental. And if you do think that you've done something wrong in whatever it is that you're creating, just go with that. Life is imperfect and we are alive and want to be alive. So let's be imperfectly alive. You can tap on, I am perfectly imperfect. You can use logic and structure to create something different for yourself in which you can be creative. The more that you can be logical about things and also be playful, be creative, the more balanced you can be. And that really helps you to make better choices, find different solutions, and experiment with new ways of being, as well as getting you into a more playful and happier mood. And when we're happier, we're less likely to be eating out of emotional reasons. To summarize then, the three main reasons why you want to connect with your creativity are firstly, because it helps you to unlock your emotions, to understand better what is going on for you. And that's always helpful if there's emotional eating in the picture. Secondly, in itself, doing something creative can bring you some greater calm. So it lowers your cortisol, which lowers your ghrelin, that hunger hormone, and it therefore helps you to eat in a more balanced way in and of itself. And finally, it helps you to problem solve, to visualize a different possibility, different way of being. And my top tips in terms of how to go about that is firstly to figure out what has been blocking you from your creativity. Is it one of these myths or some associated belief? So then tap or haven on that belief, on that myth, so that you can let it go and get into that more creative state. Pick a project that you want to do. Are you going to do a poem on your anger? Are you going to do a painting on how you feel in this moment? Are you going to create a piece of music to represent how you want to feel in the future? And then set aside a time regularly for your creativity. As I said, creativity is a skill, not something innate. So practice, play with it, explore it, and most of all, have fun. If you'd like some help in deciding what kind of emotion you could be looking at for this, you could explore my series on the emotions that most often underlie emotional eating. And do check out some of my Kaizen tapping videos where you have just a very quick little bit of tapping or havening or meditation of some kind to help you to get into that better creative state.